Welcome to Sleepless Survivors. Tonight, we journey into the ancient past, to a time when gods walked the earth, when kings claimed divine blood, and when the line between myth and history blurred into mystery. Close your eyes, relax your body, and let your mind drift back through the millennia, to the age of the Anunnaki, the enigmatic beings who some believe shaped the destiny of humanity itself. Take a deep breath. Let the weight of the day fall away. Tonight, you need not worry. You need not think. Simply listen, and allow yourself to float gently into sleep as we explore one of history's most fascinating enigmas. The story begins in Mesopotamia, the land between two rivers, the Tigris and Euphrates, where civilization first took root in the fertile soil of what is now Iraq. Here, in the 4th millennium before the Common Era, the Sumerians built the world's first cities. They invented writing, mathematics, astronomy, and law. They created complex irrigation systems, massive temples called ziggurats, and a society so advanced that it would influence every civilization that followed. But the Sumerians themselves claimed they did not do this alone. In their clay tablets, inscribed with wedge-shaped cuneiform script, they wrote of the Anunnaki, beings who came from the heavens, who taught humanity the arts of civilization, and who ruled as kings and queens over the ancient world. The word Anunnaki can be translated in different ways, but most scholars agree it means something like those who came from heaven to earth, or princely offspring. In Sumerian cosmology, these were not mere legends or metaphors. They were described as real beings, with names, genealogies, cities, and complex relationships with one another and with humanity. Let your breathing slow. Feel your muscles releasing tension, starting from your toes, moving up through your legs, your abdomen, your chest, your arms, your neck, and finally your face. As you relax deeper and deeper, we travel back in time. According to Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki came to Earth long before the first human civilizations. The ancient tablets speak of a time when these beings descended from the sky, from their home world they called Nibiru, a planet with an enormous elliptical orbit that brought it into the inner solar system only once every 3,600 years. The Anunnaki came to Earth with a purpose. They sought gold, but not for adornment or wealth, as humans would later desire it. According to interpretations of the texts, they needed gold to repair their planet's atmosphere, to suspend it as fine particles in the upper atmosphere of Nibiru, to reflect and retain heat as their world drifted far from the sun during its long orbital journey. At first, the Anunnaki mined the gold themselves. They established operations in Southeast Africa, in the Abzu, the deep places of the earth where precious metals could be found. For thousands upon thousands of years, they toiled in the mines extracting the gold they needed. But this was hard work, even for the Anunnaki. The tablets tell of a rebellion, of the lesser Anunnaki, the Igigi, growing weary of their endless labour. They went on strike, surrounding the house of Enlil, the commander of the Earth mission, demanding relief from their burdens. It was then that Enki, the chief scientist of the Anunnaki, proposed a solution. He would create workers, primitive beings who could take over the mining operations. Using genetic manipulation, combining the essence of the Anunnaki with that of the most advanced hominid species on Earth at the time, Enki created the first humans. Breathe slowly, in and out. Feel yourself sinking deeper into your bed, deeper into relaxation, deeper into the ancient past. The creation of humanity is described in several Sumerian and Babylonian texts, most notably in the Atrahasis epic and the Enuma Elish. In these accounts, the goddess Ninti, whose name means Lady of Life, and who was also called Ninmah or Ninhursag, worked alongside Enki to fashion the first humans. The texts describe a process that sounds remarkably like genetic engineering. They speak of mixing the essence of an Anunnaki god with clay, which some interpret as a euphemism for biological material. The goddess Ninti would create these new beings in her womb, with different interpretations suggesting either literal gestation or some form of laboratory vessel. The first humans were called Lulu, which means mixed one, or the one who has been mixed. They were created to be workers, to serve the Anunnaki, to till the fields and work the mines. The texts say that at first these early humans could not reproduce on their own. They had to be created one by one, in batches, with 14 birth goddesses working simultaneously, to create 7 males and 7 females at a time, but Enki, who is consistently portrayed as the friend and protector of humanity throughout Sumerian literature, gave humanity more. In the famous story that parallels the biblical account of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, Enki granted humans the knowledge and ability to reproduce on their own, an act that angered Enlil, who saw humanity as nothing more than servants. Let your mind wander gently through these ancient stories. Don't try to analyse or judge. Simply let the images form and dissolve like clouds drifting across a summer sky. The Anunnaki were not a monolithic group. They had hierarchies, families, rivalries and conflicts. At the head of their pantheon was Anu, the sky god, the father of the gods, who ruled from the heavenly city and rarely came to earth himself. Anu had many children, but 2 of his sons would come to dominate the affairs of earth. These were Enki and Enlil, half-brothers who would become rivals for power and influence over both the Anunnaki on earth and the humans they had created. Enlil, whose name means Lord of the Air or Lord of the Command, was the firstborn son of Anu and his official consort. By right of succession, Enlil was the heir, the prince who would command. He was given authority over earth, establishing his seat of power in the city of Nippur, at the geographic centre of Sumer. Enlil represented order, authority and law. He could be stern, even harsh, viewing humanity primarily as labour force. Enki, whose name means Lord of the Earth, was born to Anu and another goddess. Though older in years than Enlil, he was not the official heir due to his mother's lesser status. Enki was given dominion over the waters and the deep places, the Abzu. He established his city at Eridu, considered the oldest city in Sumer. Enki was the wise one, the clever one, the scientist and magician. He understood genetics, engineering, and the secrets of life itself. Throughout the myths, Enki consistently aids humanity, teaching them skills, protecting them from Enlil's wrath, and treating them with kindness. The rivalry between Enlil and Enki would shape the destiny of the ancient world. They represented different philosophies about humanity's role and value. Where Enlil saw servants, Enki saw potential. Where Enlil wanted control, Enki granted freedom. This tension runs through every Sumerian myth, every ancient story of gods and humans. Your eyelids are heavy, your body is completely relaxed, you're safe, comfortable, and drifting peacefully as we continue our journey. The Anunnaki established cities across Mesopotamia, each ruled by one of their number. These cities were not just human settlements, they were centres of Anunnaki power, each with its great ziggurat, its artificial mountain reaching toward the sky. Eridu, the city of Enki, was the first. Archaeological evidence confirms it was indeed the oldest continuously inhabited settlement in the region, its temples rebuilt on the same spot for thousands of years. Here, Enki conducted his scientific work, his genetic experiments, and his studies of the Earth's waters and natural systems. Nippur was Enlil's city, the religious centre of Sumer, where the fates were decreed and the laws were kept. The great ziggurat of Nippur housed the Akur, the mountain house, Enlil's temple and seat of power. Uruk was given to Inanna, granddaughter of Enlil, the fiery goddess of love and war. She would become one of the most prominent deities of the ancient world, known later as Ishtar in Babylonian times, and influencing goddess worship across the Mediterranean and Middle East. Ur was the city of Nanna, also called Sin, the moon god and son of Enlil. The ziggurat of Ur still stands today, its massive structure a testament to ancient engineering. Sippar belonged to Utu, also called Shamash, the sun god, the god of justice who could see all things under the sun's light. Lagash, Umma, Kish, and many other cities each had their patron deity, their Anunnaki lord or lady who dwelt in the ziggurat and ruled through human intermediaries. These cities were connected by trade and diplomacy, but also by rivalry and war. The Anunnaki's conflicts often played out through human armies, with cities going to war when their patron deities had disputes. The tablets tell of conflicts over water rights, over boundaries, over prestige and power. Breathe deeply. Let the names and places wash over you like a gentle tide. You need not remember them. Just let them carry you deeper into rest. The relationship between the Anunnaki and humanity evolved over time. Initially, humans were purely workers, but as the millennia passed, the Anunnaki began to interact with them in more complex ways. The texts speak of Anunnaki taking human partners, of demigods born from these unions. The famous Epic of Gilgamesh centers on such a figure. Gilgamesh was said to be 2/3 god and 1/3 man, his mother the goddess Ninsun, his father a human king. He possessed superhuman strength and wisdom, ruled the city of Uruk, and went on a quest for immortality that would take him to meet Utnapishtim, the Sumerian Noah who survived the Great Flood. These hybrid beings, part Anunnaki and part human, often became kings and queens, rulers who could claim divine blood and therefore divine right to rule. This is where we begin to see the origin of the concept of the divine right of kings, a political philosophy that would persist for thousands of years, even into medieval Europe. The Sumerian king list, one of the most fascinating documents from ancient Mesopotamia, records the reigns of kings from the time when kingship descended from heaven until historical times. The early kings on this list are said to have ruled for impossibly long periods, tens of thousands of years in some cases. Then came the flood, after which the lengths of reigns become shorter, though still far beyond normal human lifespans for the first few generations. Only gradually do the numbers decrease to realistic human reigns. Scholars have puzzled over this document for generations. Some dismiss it as pure mythology. Others see in it a compressed history of many rulers combined into single legendary figures. But those who take the Anunnaki theory seriously suggest these were the actual Anunnaki themselves ruling directly, followed by their hybrid offspring with increasingly human genetics, living shorter and shorter lives with each generation. Let your thoughts become dreamlike, floating without structure or concern. You're doing perfectly, just listening, just drifting. Among the many stories of the Anunnaki, few are as dramatic as the tale of the Great Flood. This story appears in multiple Mesopotamian texts, and is clearly the inspiration for the biblical Noah's Ark narrative. According to the Atrahasis epic and the 11th tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, humanity had grown numerous upon the earth. Their noise and activity disturbed Enlil, who found them troublesome and perhaps even threatening. In his irritation and concern, Enlil convinced the Council of Anunnaki to wipe out humanity entirely. The method would be a great flood. The texts suggest this may not have been entirely artificial, that the Anunnaki knew a natural catastrophe was coming, perhaps the orbital approach of Nibiru, causing gravitational disruptions, or maybe the end of an ice age causing sudden massive flooding. And Enlil simply decided not to warn the humans, allowing the catastrophe to accomplish his goal. But Enki, ever the protector of humanity, could not let this happen. He was bound by an oath not to directly warn humans of what was coming, but he found a loophole. He spoke to the reed wall of a house where his faithful servant Atrahasis slept, knowing the man would overhear. He told the wall to build a boat, to seal it with pitch, to bring aboard his family and representatives of all animals. Atrahasis did as instructed. The Sumerian version describes a massive vessel sealed completely, shaped more like a cube than the Ark of later tradition. When the flood came, it was so terrible that even the Anunnaki were frightened, fleeing to the upper atmosphere in their skyships and watching the destruction with horror and regret. After the waters receded, the boat came to rest on a mountain. Atrahasis made a sacrifice, and the smell of roasting meat rose to the heavens. The Anunnaki, who had been without human workers to provide food and maintain the temples, gathered around like flies, the text says, so hungry were they. Enlil was furious to see that humans had survived, but Enki defended his actions. A compromise was reached. Humanity would be allowed to continue, but measures would be put in place to control their population. Disease, predators, reduced fertility, and shortened lifespans. Your breathing is slow and steady. The story continues, but you drift along with it, comfortable and peaceful, ready to slip into deep, restful sleep. As we move forward through time, we see the Anunnaki gradually withdrawing from direct rule. The texts speak of a major conflict among the Anunnaki themselves, a war so destructive that it changed the course of history. This conflict centered on control of the Sinai Peninsula, where, according to interpretations of the texts, the Anunnaki had established a spaceport. The pyramids of Giza, in this interpretation, were not tombs but monuments and guidance beacons for approaching spacecraft. The war began over the city of Babylon, where Marduk, son of Enki, attempted to establish supremacy over all Anunnaki and all humanity. Marduk declared himself supreme among the gods, taking the title of 50 names, incorporating the attributes of all other deities into himself. Enlil's clan opposed this move. Tensions escalated. Eventually, weapons were deployed that the texts describe in terms eerily reminiscent of nuclear warfare. Cities were destroyed by evil winds that caused stones to crumble and left the land poisoned. The description of Sodom and Gomorrah's destruction in the Bible parallels these accounts. Archaeological evidence in the region does show a sudden abandonment of settlements in the early Bronze Age, with cities destroyed and not rebuilt, and evidence of intense heat affecting structures. Whether this was nuclear warfare, natural catastrophe, or conventional warfare combined with disease is still debated. After this great conflict, the direct presence of the Anunnaki on Earth diminished. They withdrew, ruling increasingly through human intermediaries, through kings who claimed divine descent but were fundamentally mortal. Let this ancient conflict fade into the background of your awareness. You're so relaxed now, so comfortable, so ready for sleep. The Anunnaki kings left their mark on every culture that followed. The concept of divine kingship spread from Sumer throughout the ancient world. In Egypt, the pharaohs were considered living gods, incarnations of Horus, son of Osiris and Isis, with titles and attributes remarkably similar to those of Sumerian divine kings. In the Indus Valley Civilization, in ancient China, in pre-Columbian America, we find similar concepts. Rulers who claimed descent from the gods, who served as intermediaries between heaven and earth, who built massive monuments aligned with astronomical phenomena. The Sumerian concept of the me, the divine laws and powers that governed reality, influenced Greek philosophy's concept of the logos, the underlying order of the cosmos. Sumerian astronomical knowledge, their division of the circle into 360 degrees, their base 60 number system that gives us 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour, spread throughout the ancient world and persist to this day. The story of the Anunnaki influenced the Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish, where Marduk becomes the supreme god who creates the world from the body of the chaos dragon Tiamat. This, in turn, influenced Hebrew creation narratives, Greek cosmogonies, and eventually the worldviews of Christianity and Islam. Whether the Anunnaki were ancient astronauts, mythological representations of natural forces, memories of an advanced prehistoric human civilization, or something else entirely, their influence on human culture is undeniable. They represent humanity's oldest stories about our origins, our purpose, and our relationship with forces greater than ourselves. Your mind is quiet now. The stories blend together like watercolours on wet paper, beautiful but undefined. You're so close to sleep. Let us return to the beginning, to Eridu, the first city. Archaeological excavations have revealed 18 successive temples built on the same spot, each one built atop the ruins of the previous one, stretching back to 5400 BCE. The earliest temple was a small structure, barely more than a shrine, but even then it followed the same basic plan as the great temples that would come later, an offering table at the far end facing the door where the deity would meet the worshipper. Imagine this place in ancient times, the ziggurat rising, above the marshlands where the Euphrates River spread into channels and reeds. The smell of water and mud, of incense and roasting meat from sacrifices, the sound of chanting priests, of musicians with their lyres and drums, of workers and merchants going about their daily tasks. In the innermost chamber of the temple, the Holy of Holies, was the place where Enki himself was said to dwell when he visited Earth. Here, the high priest would enter to receive divine instruction. What happened in that chamber? Were there really Anunnaki present, either physically or through some form of advanced communication technology? Or was this an elaborate ritual where human priests entered altered states and interpreted their visions as divine messages? We cannot know for certain. The line between mythology, history, and archetypal psychology blurs when we look so far back. But we can feel the weight of time, the presence of those ancient peoples who believed so deeply in these beings that they oriented their entire civilization around them. Breathe in slowly, hold for a moment, breathe out. You're floating now, barely conscious, ready to let go completely. The goddess Inanna deserves special attention in our journey through Anunnaki lore. Known later as Ishtar, her story is one of the most compelling in Sumerian mythology. She was the granddaughter of Enlil, daughter of Nanna the moon god, and sister to Utu the sun god. But Inanna was restless, ambitious, unsatisfied with her initial gifts and position. In one famous myth, Inanna travels to visit her grandfather Enki in Eridu. She's received with great honour, and during the feast, Enki, perhaps intoxicated by beer, yes, the Sumerians already had beer and wrote hymns praising it, gives Inanna the me, the divine powers and laws. These included kingship, priesthood, sexual power, music, craftsmanship, and many other aspects of civilization. When Enki sobered up and realised what he had done, he sent his servants to retrieve the Emi from Inanna, but she had already escaped back to her city of Uruk. Though Enki's servants pursued her through multiple attempts, she successfully defended her prize. This myth explains why Uruk became so powerful, and why Inanna became one of the most important deities of the ancient world. Another famous myth tells of Inanna's descent to the underworld, to visit her sister Ereshkigal, Queen of the Dead. Inanna had to pass through 7 gates, at each one removing a piece of her divine regalia, her crown, her necklace, her breastplate, and so on, until she entered the underworld naked and powerless. There, she was judged, killed, and hung on a hook. Only through the intervention of Enki, who created beings that could enter the underworld and revive her with the food and water of life, was Inanna rescued. But the laws of the underworld demanded a substitute. Eventually, her consort Dumuzi was chosen to take her place, spending part of each year in the underworld, a myth that parallels many agricultural deities who die and are reborn with the seasons. These stories of Inanna show the Anunnaki as complex beings with emotions, desires, and flaws. They are not the remote, perfect god of later monotheistic traditions, but beings who love, hate, scheme, make mistakes, and suffer consequences. Let these ancient stories weave themselves into your dreams. You're so deeply relaxed now, your conscious mind fading into sleep. The ziggurat was the architectural symbol of Anunnaki presence. These massive stepped pyramids, built of mud brick in a land where stone was scarce, dominated the landscape of Mesopotamian cities. The word ziggurat comes from the Akkadian zikkuratu, meaning to build on a raised area. Each ziggurat served as the earthly dwelling of a deity. At the very top was a temple chamber, where the god or goddess would reside during their earthly sojourns. The priests would ascend the long staircases to bring offerings and receive divine instruction. The ziggurat connected earth to heaven, the human realm to the divine, making visible and physical the belief that the gods lived among humans. The most famous ziggurat was the Etemenanki in Babylon, dedicated to Marduk. Its name means Temple of the Foundation of Heaven and Earth. This structure is likely the inspiration for the biblical Tower of Babel story. It rose in 7 stages to a height of some 300 feet, dominating the city. The Greek historian Herodotus described it in detail, mentioning the blue glazed bricks that covered its exterior, making it shine like the sky itself. The ziggurat of Ur, dedicated to the moon god Nannar, still stands in partial ruins today. Even in its degraded state, it is massive and impressive, giving us a glimpse of how these structures dominated the ancient landscape. The original structure had 3 staircases, each with 100 steps converging at the gate to the first terrace. Imagine climbing those steps in ancient times. The sun beating down, the smell of incense smoke rising from below, the sound of temple musicians and chanting priests, each step taking you higher, closer to heaven, closer to the dwelling place of the gods. At the top, in the cool darkness of the temple chamber, what would you find? A statue? A throne? Or perhaps something more, something that justified the belief that these were the literal homes of the Anunnaki. Your body is so heavy, sinking into your bed as if you were sinking into warm water. Let yourself sink deeper, deeper into complete relaxation. The Anunnaki were closely associated with astronomy and the heavens. The Sumerians had sophisticated knowledge of the solar system, including, according to some interpretations, knowledge of all the planets, including those not visible to the naked eye. The ancient Sumerian cylinder seal, known as Va-240, held in the Berlin Museum, appears to show a star surrounded by 11 planets or spherical bodies, which some have interpreted as depicting the entire solar system, including the outer planets not discovered until modern times. Whether this interpretation is correct is debated, but what is undeniable is that the Sumerians had extensive astronomical knowledge. They tracked the movements of the planets, identified constellations, and predicted celestial events. They understood that the Earth rotates on an axis, and that this axis precesses slowly over vast periods of time, the precession of the equinoxes that takes about 26,000 years to complete a full cycle. How did the ancient Sumerians know these things? Traditional archaeology suggests they gained this knowledge through careful observation over generations. Alternative researchers suggest they were taught by the Anunnaki, who brought this knowledge from their own advanced civilization. The Anunnaki were associated with specific celestial bodies. Anu was associated with the northern ecliptic, the path of the sun and planets across the sky. Enlil was associated with the northern celestial hemisphere. Enki was associated with the southern celestial hemisphere. Each of the 7 visible planets, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter and Saturn, had an Anunnaki deity associated with it. This astronomical knowledge was not mere curiosity. It was fundamental to Sumerian religion, agriculture and governance. The movements of the heavens determined when to plant and harvest, when to hold festivals, when kings should make important decisions. The Anunnaki were, in a sense, embodiments of cosmic order, the forces that regulated the universe. Let the stars wheel overhead in your imagination. You're gazing up at the night sky, but your eyes are growing heavy, closing as sleep overtakes you. The concept of kingship in Mesopotamia was deeply tied to the Anunnaki. Kings did not rule by their own power, but as representatives of the gods. The Sumerian king list begins with the line, "After the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu." Kingship itself was one of the Mi, the divine powers that Anu granted to earth. A king's legitimacy came from divine selection. A deity would choose a ruler, often appearing to them in dreams or visions. The king would then be ceremonially invested with power through elaborate rituals. The most important of these was the sacred marriage rite, where the king would ritually marry the goddess Inanna, represented by her high priestess, to ensure the fertility of the land and the prosperity of the people. Kings bore titles that emphasized their relationship to the gods. They were shepherds, chosen by the deities to care for humanity, the flock. They were beloved of various gods. They built temples and made offerings to maintain divine favor. Their role was to maintain Mat, or Mi, the cosmic order, ensuring that human society reflected divine will. But kingship was also a burden. Kings could lose divine favor through impiety or failure. The gods could grant victory or defeat in war, prosperity or famine, peace or chaos. A king lived constantly aware that he ruled only at divine pleasure, that his power was borrowed from the Anunnaki, who had granted him his throne. This understanding of kingship spread throughout the ancient world. Egyptian pharaohs, Chinese emperors, Indian rajas, European monarchs, all would adopt some version of the divine right of kings, the idea that royal authority came from gods or God. Though the theology varied, the root concept remained the same. True authority descends from heaven, from beings greater than human, and human rulers are merely representatives of that higher power. Your mind drifts through these ancient palaces, these ziggurat temples, these throne rooms where kings receive divine commands. You're barely aware now, consciousness fading like the last light of sunset. Let us consider the great city of Uruk, the city of Gilgamesh and Inanna. At its height around 2900 BCE, Uruk covered about 6 square kilometers and had a population estimated at 50,000 to 80,000 people, making it perhaps the largest city in the world at that time. The city had massive walls, according to the Epic of Gilgamesh, which the hero king himself built. The walls were so wide that a chariot could ride along the top. Archaeological excavations have confirmed these walls existed, stretching for 9 kilometers around the city, made of fired bricks, an enormous expense of labor and resources. Within the walls were 2 great temple complexes. The Iana, the House of Heaven, was dedicated to Inanna and later to Anu. This complex covered a massive area and included multiple temples, courtyards and administrative buildings. The other complex, the Kulaba, included the Temple of Anu and the White Temple, named for the whitewashed walls that would have gleamed in the sun. Uruk was where writing was invented, or at least where we find the earliest examples of true writing rather than simple pictographs. The necessity of managing the temple economy, keeping track of offerings, rations, workers and resources, led to the development of increasingly sophisticated record-keeping systems. Eventually, these accounting marks evolved into a full writing system capable of recording language itself. The invention of writing changed everything. Knowledge could now be preserved across generations, not just in fallible human memory, but in physical records. Laws could be codified, history could be recorded, literature could be created. The Epic of Gilgamesh itself, one of humanity's oldest stories, was written down in Uruk. Though the story may have been told orally for generations, its preservation in writing allowed it to survive to the present day. Was this gift of writing taught by the Anunnaki? The Sumerians themselves credited their gods with teaching them the arts of civilization, including writing. Nabu, son of Marduk, was specifically the god of writing and wisdom, the scribe of the gods. Whether divine intervention or human, innovation, writing emerged in Uruk, and from there it spread throughout the world. You're floating in the space between waking and sleeping now, thoughts dissolving before they fully form. Let go, just let go, and drift. Among the many Anunnaki, Ningishzida deserves mention. He was the son of Enki, associated with healing, magic, and the underworld. His symbol was the caduceus, two serpents entwined around a staff, which would later be adopted as the symbol of medicine in Greek culture, attributed to Hermes and Asclepius. Ningishzida was said to be a master of genetic science, working alongside his father Enki in the creation and modification of life forms. Some interpretations of the text suggest he was involved not only in the creation of humans, but also in creating hybrids of various animals, explaining the griffins, sphinxes, and other composite creatures that appear in ancient art. According to some theories, Ningishzida travelled to Egypt, where he became known as Thoth, the god of wisdom, writing, and magic. There, he helped establish Egyptian civilization, bringing the knowledge and arts that Enki had developed in Sumer. The similar serpent symbolism, the emphasis on astronomical knowledge, and the architectural similarities between ziggurats and pyramids are cited as evidence of this connection. Whether literally true or symbolic of cultural exchange, the parallels between Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilizations are striking. Both emerged suddenly with sophisticated technology and organization. Both built massive monuments aligned with celestial phenomena. Both had complex pantheons of gods who were deeply involved in human affairs. Both had concepts of divine kingship and elaborate afterlife beliefs. The symbol of the serpent appears repeatedly in connection with the Anunnaki, particularly with Enki. He is often depicted with serpents or as a serpent. The biblical story of the serpent in the Garden of Eden, who encourages Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge, parallels the Sumerian stories of Enki granting knowledge and awareness to humanity against Enlil's wishes. In both cases, the serpent Enki is the one who frees humanity from ignorance, even if it means breaking the rules of the supreme authority. This serpent symbolism appears in cultures worldwide. The Kundalini serpent in Hindu tradition, Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent in Mesoamerica, the rainbow serpent in Aboriginal Australian mythology. Whether these represent independent symbolic development or some shared ancient source remains an open question. Your breathing is barely perceptible now, slow and steady as ocean waves. You're so peaceful, so still, ready to surrender to sleep. The tablets speak of advanced technology possessed by the Anunnaki. They describe flying machines, weapons of terrible power, communication devices, and other technology that seemed magical to the ancient peoples who recorded these accounts. Enlil's Bond Heaven Earth was described as a chamber where he could communicate with other Anunnaki anywhere on Earth or even in the heavens. Is this pure fantasy or a description of some form of advanced communication technology that the primitive scribes could only describe in the terms they knew? The Mi themselves might have been some form of advanced devices or data storage systems. In one text, when Inanna steals the Mi from Enki, she loads them onto her boat of heaven and flees. They are described as physical objects, perhaps crystalline or metallic, that could be transported and that embodied the powers and knowledge of civilization. The weapons used in the War of the Gods are described in terms that some interpret as nuclear weapons, evil winds that poison the land, stones that crumble, intense heat and light. The biblical destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, where Lot's wife is turned to a pillar of salt when she looks back at the explosion, parallels these descriptions. Archaeological evidence of a sudden catastrophic event in the region around 2350 BCE adds fuel to these speculations. The Mi of flying is mentioned repeatedly. Inanna's boat of heaven, Marduk's supreme traveller, and other sky vehicles are described. The gods regularly travelled between cities and between earth and heaven. Were these purely mythological, or descriptions of actual aircraft or spacecraft that ancient peoples had no other way to describe, we cannot know with certainty. But we can imagine, and in imagining and wondering, we connect with those ancient peoples who looked up at the stars and wondered if the gods might return, descending from the heavens in their chariots of fire. Let these mysteries remain mysteries. You need not solve them. Just drift with them like clouds in a summer sky, peaceful and free from concern. The Great Flood stands as one of the most universal myths appearing in cultures across the globe. But the Sumerian version is the oldest written account we have, predating the biblical version by many centuries. The story of Atrahasis, also called Ziusudra in some versions, or Utnapishtim in the Akkadian epic of Gilgamesh, resonates with profound human fears and hopes. The fear of total destruction, of everything being washed away, erased. The hope that somehow, some few might survive, might preserve life and knowledge through catastrophe. Geological evidence suggests there was indeed massive flooding in the Mesopotamian region, possibly when the Persian Gulf broke through natural barriers at the end of the last ice age, or when the Black Sea suddenly flooded as the Mediterranean broke through the Bosporus. These would have been regional catastrophes of unimaginable scale to the people who experienced them, easily seeming like world-ending events. In the Sumerian account, after Atrahasis' boat comes to rest and he makes his sacrifice, an argument breaks out among the Anunnaki. Enlil is furious that his plan to eliminate humanity has been thwarted. But the other gods, hungry and tired, having realized they depend on humanity for temple service and offerings, argue against him. Enki explains that humanity should not be collectively punished for the failings of some. If population control is needed, there are other methods: disease, predators, occasional small-scale disasters. But complete annihilation is neither just nor necessary. Enlil eventually relents. A new agreement is made. Humanity will continue, but under new conditions. Human lifespans will be limited to prevent individuals from accumulating too much knowledge and power. This explains why the antediluvian kings lived for tens of thousands of years, while post-flood kings lived mere centuries, and modern humans live less than 1 century. The rainbow, mentioned in both Sumerian and biblical flood accounts, serves as a symbol of this covenant, a promise that total destruction by flood would not come again. Whether taken literally or symbolically, the flood myth embodies humanity's resilience, our ability to survive catastrophe and rebuild. Rain falls in your imagination, soft and gentle, pattering on leaves, running in streams. The sound soothes you, lulls you deeper into rest. As the 3rd millennium BCE progressed, direct references to the Anunnaki in texts became less frequent. They transformed from active characters in stories to distant deities to be worshipped. Kingship became more clearly human, with divine descent claimed but the kings themselves clearly mortal. This transition may reflect an actual withdrawal of the Anunnaki from active involvement in human affairs. Various theories suggest they left Earth, perhaps returning to Nibiru, or ascending to some other dimension, or perhaps they never physically existed but were always mythological representations of natural forces and human psychology. What they left behind was a template for civilization itself. The concept of cities, of law, of kingship, of writing, of art and literature, of mathematics and astronomy. All these first appeared in Sumer under the supposed guidance of the Anunnaki. The influence spread. When Sargon of Akkad conquered Sumer around 2300 BCE, he adopted and adapted Sumerian culture, spreading it throughout his empire. The Akkadian language replaced Sumerian as the common tongue, but Sumerian remained the language of religion and scholarship, like Latin in medieval Europe. The Babylonians absorbed Sumerian mythology, adapting it to their own purposes. Marduk, once just one of many Anunnaki, became supreme, his elevation to the head of the pantheon reflecting Babylon's political dominance. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, reframed the old Sumerian stories to glorify Marduk. The Assyrians, fierce warriors who conquered much of the Middle East, took the Babylonian mythology and made it even more militaristic. Their chief god, Ashur, absorbed many of Marduk's attributes, becoming the divine justification for Assyrian imperial expansion. Each culture adapted. The stories, but the core remained. Beings from the heavens who came to earth, who shaped humanity, who ruled as divine kings, and who established the order of civilization itself. You're barely conscious now, these stories washing over you like waves on a distant shore. Let them carry you away into sleep. The legacy of the Anunnaki extends far beyond ancient Mesopotamia. Jewish scholars during the Babylonian exile encountered these myths and incorporated elements into their own traditions. The biblical creation story, the flood, the Tower of Babel, the division of languages, all have Sumerian precursors. The Nephilim mentioned in Genesis, the giants in the earth, who were born when the sons of God took human wives, closely parallel the Anunnaki and their hybrid offspring. The Garden of Eden parallels Enki's garden in Eridu, with the serpent as Enki himself, offering knowledge to humanity. Greek mythology shows influences from the East. The Titans, the elder gods overthrown by the Olympians, parallel the Anunnaki. Prometheus stealing fire, knowledge from the gods to give to humanity, echoes Enki's role. The war between Titans and Olympians parallels the conflicts among the Anunnaki. Hindu traditions speak of the Devas and Asuras, races of powerful beings who lived before and alongside humanity, who had advanced technology and knowledge, and whose conflicts shaped the world. The Vimana, flying machines described in ancient Sanskrit texts, parallel the sky boats of the Anunnaki. Chinese mythology tells of divine emperors who descended from heaven and taught humanity civilization. The Egyptian gods who walked among humans and ruled as pharaohs. The Mesoamerican gods like Quetzalcoatl who brought knowledge and then departed, promising to return. Are all these independent mythological developments, or do they preserve memories of some shared ancient reality? Did the Anunnaki, in some form, truly exist and interact with early human civilizations around the globe? Or do these myths represent universal human archetypes, stories we tell ourselves about our origins and our relationship with forces greater than ourselves? The answer may be both. Perhaps there was some historical reality, some ancient civilization, or interaction that seeded these stories. And perhaps, over millennia, these stories evolved to embody universal truths about human nature, our search for meaning, our hope that we are more than mere animals, that we have some connection to the divine. Let these questions dissolve. There is no need to answer them now. Simply float in the mystery, comfortable in not knowing. In modern times, interest in the Anunnaki has exploded. Books, documentaries, websites, and countless discussions explore these ancient beings and their potential connection to human origins. Some of this interest is scholarly, careful analysis of ancient texts and archaeological evidence. Some is more speculative, weaving together mythology, alternative history, and UFO phenomena into elaborate theories. The work of Zecharia Sitchin, beginning with his 1976 book The 12th Planet, brought the Anunnaki to popular attention. Sitchin proposed that the Sumerian text should be read as literal history, not mythology. He theorized that the Anunnaki were physical extraterrestrials from the planet Nibiru who came to Earth approximately 450,000 years ago, genetically engineered humanity, and ruled as the gods of ancient civilizations. While mainstream scholars reject Sitchin's translations and interpretations, his work inspired a generation of researchers and enthusiasts to look more closely at ancient Sumerian texts. The questions he raised about the sophistication of ancient knowledge, the rapid development of civilization, the universal themes in mythology, remain compelling even if his specific answers are disputed. Recent decades have seen increasing interest in the idea of ancient astronauts, advanced prehistoric civilizations, and lost knowledge. The precision of ancient megalithic structures, from the Great Pyramid to Puma Punku, suggests sophisticated engineering knowledge. The astronomical alignments of ancient monuments suggest advanced understanding of celestial mechanics. Ancient maps, like the Piri Reis map, seem to show geographic knowledge that shouldn't have been available at the time. All these mysteries point toward the possibility that the ancient world was more sophisticated than we typically assume, that knowledge has been lost and found and lost again through the cycles of history. Whether the Anunnaki were the source of this knowledge, whether they were even real in any physical sense, the search for answers connects us to our ancient ancestors and their quest to understand their place in the cosmos. Your mind expands to encompass these vast questions, then contracts back to the simple present moment. You, resting comfortably, breathing slowly, drifting towards sleep. Consider the concept of the me more deeply. These were described as physical objects that embodied divine powers and attributes. When Inanna took them from Enki, She literally carried them away. They could be lost, stolen, damaged. They gave their possessor actual abilities or authority. Some have speculated that the E were crystalline data storage devices, perhaps something like advanced computer chips or memory crystals. In a society without such technology, how would you describe such objects? As magical tablets that contained knowledge and power. In modern terms, we might think of them as hard drives containing the software of civilization. The programs for agriculture, mathematics, metallurgy, government, art, music, everything needed to build and maintain a complex society. Whoever possessed these me possessed the knowledge to create and control civilization itself. The tablets list hundreds of me, covering every aspect of existence from kingship to farming, from war to lovemaking, from truth to deceit. They represent a complete encyclopedia of life, a database of knowledge and authority. Enki's library in Eridu was said to contain vast knowledge written on tablets. The famous library of Ashurbanipal in Nineveh, containing thousands of clay tablets, was modelled after these earlier collections. The Great Library of Alexandria continued this tradition. The idea that knowledge should be collected, preserved, and made accessible for learning comes from these ancient Sumerian origins. How much knowledge has been lost? The ancient world suffered countless catastrophes, invasions, fires, floods, the simple erosion of time. Clay tablets survive better than paper or papyrus, but many were destroyed or remain unexcavated. What percentage of Sumerian literature survives? Archaeologists estimate perhaps 1 to 5% at most. The rest is lost, dissolved back into the earth from which it came. What did those lost tablets contain? More stories of the Anunnaki perhaps, technical knowledge, astronomical observations, historical records. Somewhere beneath the sands of Iraq, thousands of tablets lie buried, waiting for excavation that may never come. What secrets do they hold? What knowledge of the Anunnaki and their relationship with humanity? These questions need no answers tonight. Let them go, floating away like clouds as your consciousness fades into dreams. The city of Nippur held special significance in Sumerian religion. It was never the capital of a political kingdom, but it was always recognized as the religious center, the place where kingship was legitimized. A king's rule was not truly established until he had been recognized and blessed at Nippur's temple of Enlil. This gave Nippur's priests enormous power. They could make or break kings, grant legitimacy or withhold it. They maintained the calendar, calculated the movements of the heavens, preserved the sacred texts. They were the keepers of orthodoxy, the arbiters of religious truth. The Ekur, Enlil's temple at Nippur, was considered the axis mundi, the center of the world, the point where heaven and earth met. In the temple's deepest chamber was the Duranki, the bond of heaven and earth, where Enlil would appear and communicate with his priests. Pilgrims came from across Sumer to worship at Nippur. Kings sent rich offerings. The city accumulated immense wealth, not from trade or conquest, but from its religious authority. This pattern would repeat throughout history. Rome, Mecca, Jerusalem, Varanasi, cities that derive power not from armies or economics, but from spiritual authority, from being recognized as sacred spaces where the divine touches the earthly. What made these places sacred originally? In Nippur's case, it was the belief that Enlil himself had chosen it as his earthly seat. But why there? What made that particular spot special? We may never know. Perhaps it was geographically central to the early settlements. Perhaps there was some natural feature, now lost or unrecognized, that seemed sacred to the first inhabitants. Perhaps Enlil, if he physically existed, truly did establish a base there for practical reasons that became sanctified over time. Sacred geography, the idea that certain places are innately holy, appears in every culture. Mountains where gods dwell, rivers that purify, groves where spirits live. Nippur was sacred because the Anunnaki had made it so, and it remained sacred for thousands of years, even after the Anunnaki themselves had faded from active participation in human affairs. Rest in this sacred space of sleep, this holy ground of consciousness letting go. You're safe here, held by the darkness, cradled by dreams. Let us turn our attention to the goddess Ninhursag, also called Ninmah, Ninti, and many other names. She was one of the most important deities of the Sumerian pantheon, particularly in the earliest periods. She was sister to Enlil and Enki, daughter of Anu, and her titles include Mother of the Gods, Mother of all Children, and Lady of Life. Ninhursag worked with Enki to create humanity, serving as the birth goddess who formed the first humans in her womb, or in artificial wombs. The texts describe her creating 14 humans at a time, using 14 birth goddesses under her direction. She experimented with different genetic combinations, the tablets recording some failures alongside the successes. In later periods, Ninhursag's prominence declined somewhat, overshadowed by Inanna and other deities, but she never disappeared entirely. She remained the one to call upon for successful childbirth, for health, for fertility of fields and flocks. In Lagash, she was the patron deity, and the city's rulers claimed special relationship with her. The symbol of Ninhursag was the Omega symbol, which also represented the womb. This same symbol appears in later Greek culture, and of course as the last letter of the Greek alphabet, representing the end or completion. The connection between birth and death, between Alpha and Omega, beginning and end, was understood in Sumerian religion. Life is a cycle. What comes from the earth returns to the earth. What is born must die and be reborn. This understanding of cycles appears throughout Mesopotamian thought. The agricultural cycle of planting and harvest, the astronomical cycles of the planets and stars, the cycle of kingship, of dynasties rising and falling, the cycle of civilization itself, growing, flourishing, declining, and being renewed. Nothing is permanent except change itself. Even the gods, the Anunnaki, came and went, rose and fell in prominence, evolved through time. Your own consciousness cycles through waking and sleeping, activity and rest. Now is the time for rest, for letting go, for cycling down into deep restorative sleep. The concept of divine judgment and the afterlife in Sumerian religion was complex. Unlike later religions that emphasized moral behavior and reward or punishment after death, the Sumerian view was more egalitarian and more pessimistic. All human souls, regardless of their virtue, descended to the underworld, called Kur or Irkala, ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal and her consort Nergal. This underworld was not a place of punishment, but simply a pale reflection of earthly life. The dead existed as shades, eating dust and drinking brackish water. The only relief came from offerings made by the living, food, drink, and prayers that could sustain the dead and make their existence slightly less miserable. The dead, who had no one to remember them and make offerings, suffered the most, which is why having descendants was so important. To die without children meant not only the end of your line, but eternal abandonment in the afterlife. This belief motivated much of Sumerian society, the importance of marriage, of having children, of maintaining family continuity. Only a very few exceptional individuals escaped this common fate. The Anunnaki themselves, being gods, did not die in the same way humans did, and certain humans granted immortality by the gods, like Utnapishtim the flood survivor, lived forever in some distant blessed realm. The Epic of Gilgamesh centers on this question of death and immortality. Gilgamesh, two-thirds god, watches his beloved friend Enkidu die, and is seized by terror at his own inevitable mortality. He journeys to the ends of the earth seeking Utnapishtim, seeking the secret of eternal life. But even when he finds it, even when he briefly possesses the plant of youth, it is stolen by a serpent, and Gilgamesh returns home empty-handed, resigned to his mortality. The lesson of Gilgamesh is profound. Immortality is for the gods alone. Humans must accept their mortality and find meaning not in endless life, but in the deeds they accomplish, the walls they build, the stories that survive them. Gilgamesh achieves immortality not through magic, but through fame, through being remembered in story and song for millennia after his death. We remember him still, this ancient king, this seeker of eternal life. In that memory he lives, as immortal as any Anunnaki god, and so too will you be remembered by those who love you, your life rippling forward through time in ways you cannot predict or control. But for now, for tonight, simply rest, simply sleep. Let consciousness fade like the last light of evening. The ziggurats, these massive structures that dominated ancient cities, required enormous resources to build and maintain. The Tower of Babel story, derived from Mesopotamian traditions, emphasizes this, a massive communal project requiring organization, labor, and materials on an unprecedented scale. Why build them? The practical answer is that in a flat floodplain, height provided visibility and safety from floods. The religious answer is that they served as artificial mountains connecting Earth to heaven, providing a dwelling place for the gods when they visited humanity. But perhaps there was more. Some researchers note that the ziggurats, with their specific geometries and materials, might have functioned as energy collectors or transmitters. The Great Pyramids of Egypt have similar speculations, that they served purposes beyond mere tombs, that their shape and material composition and internal structure suggest functions we don't fully understand. Ancient Mesopotamia was advanced in ways we're still discovering. They had batteries, the Baghdad battery, clay jars containing iron rods wrapped in copper that, when filled with acidic liquid, produce electrical current. What did they use electricity for? We don't know. They had advanced metalworking, creating alloys and techniques that required sophisticated understanding of chemistry and high-temperature processes. They had astronomical knowledge that shouldn't have been possible without telescopes. They had mathematical concepts, including the concept of zero, that wouldn't be rediscovered for thousands of years. Were they taught these things by the Anunnaki? Or were they simply more sophisticated than we give them credit for, their achievements lost and forgotten through time's passage? Perhaps ancient peoples were just as intelligent as modern humans, just as capable of innovation and discovery, but lacking the accumulated knowledge base that allows us to build on previous generations' work. The ziggurats still stand, those that survive, silent witnesses to ancient ambitions and ancient beliefs. What secrets are sealed within their mud brick walls? What knowledge encoded in their geometric proportions and astronomical alignments? These questions dissolve into the night. No need to answer them, just breathe and release. The goddess Inanna's symbol was the 8-pointed star, which also represented the planet Venus. As the morning and evening star, Venus was one of the most prominent celestial objects after the sun and moon. Its appearance heralded dawn or announced dusk, marking the transitions between light and darkness, day and night. Inanna embodied contradictions and dualities. She was goddess of love and war, of fertility and destruction, of life and death. She was the seductress and the virgin, the compassionate mother and the fierce warrior. These contradictions weren't seen as problems, but as aspects of her completeness, her encompassing of all possibilities. In one myth, Inanna sets out to conquer the underworld, to add it to her domains. She dresses in all her regalia: the crown of heaven, the lapis lazuli necklace, the breastplate, the gold ring, the royal robe, the kohl around her eyes, the measuring rod and line. But at each of the 7 gates of the underworld, she must remove one piece, becoming progressively stripped of her power and identity. When she finally enters the throne room of Ereshkigal, she is naked and powerless. Ereshkigal judges her, kills her, and hangs her corpse on a hook for 3 days and 3 nights. Only through Enki's intervention is she rescued, brought back to life with the food and water of life. But the laws of the underworld are absolute. A substitute must take her place. Inanna ascends back to the land of the living and finds her consort Dumuzi, sitting on her throne, seemingly not grieving her absence. In fury, she designates him as her replacement. Dumuzi flees but is eventually caught. However, his sister Geshtinana offers to share his fate, and so it is decreed that Dumuzi will spend half the year in the underworld, returning to the upper world for the other half. This myth is clearly agricultural. Dumuzi represents vegetation that dies in the dry season and returns in the wet season. But it's also about the cycles of life and death, about descent into darkness and return to light, about loss and recovery. These cycles are universal, appearing in myths worldwide: Persephone and Hades, Osiris and Isis, the dying and rising god who appears in countless cultures. Your own consciousness descends now, down through the gates of waking, letting go of thoughts and worries, stripping away the day's concerns, descending into the underworld of sleep, where consciousness dissolves and dreams begin. The art of ancient Sumer reveals much about how they saw the Anunnaki. In cylinder seals, those carved stone cylinders that, when rolled across wet clay, left distinctive images, we see repeated motifs. Gods, recognizable by their horned crowns and distinctive heights, tower over human worshippers. They sit on thrones receiving offerings. They stand in flowing robes with wings, suggesting either literal wings or symbolic representation of their celestial nature. The horned crown was the distinctive mark of divinity. The more horns, the greater the god, 7 sets of horns for the greatest deities like Anu and Enlil. These horns might represent rays of light, suggesting radiance or energy surrounding the gods, or they might be literal descriptions of headdresses worn by the Anunnaki, technology mistaken for biology by the ancient artists. The gods were depicted as human in form but larger, sometimes twice as tall as humans in the carvings. Were the Anunnaki actually giants? Some interpretations suggest they were, perhaps due to their origin on a planet with different gravity. Others suggest the size difference was merely an artistic convention to show importance, the way medieval art depicts saints and angels as larger than ordinary people. The flowing robes, the elaborate jewellery, the careful attention to detail in depicting the gods. All this suggests that the Sumerians had clear visual references for how the Anunnaki looked. Whether these were based on actual sightings, descriptions passed down through generations, or pure imagination, we cannot know. But the consistency is striking. Across centuries and different cities, the iconography remains remarkably stable. In many seals, we see a winged disc, sometimes containing a figure, floating above scenes of worship or kingship. This symbol would persist through Mesopotamian culture, appearing in Akkadian, Babylonian and Assyrian art. It represents the supreme deity overseeing earthly affairs, the sun disk with wings suggesting flight and divine power. Is this purely symbolic, or does it depict an actual craft, a vehicle of the gods as some theorists suggest? Let these ancient images form and dissolve in your mind's eye. Ancient gods, ancient kings, ancient peoples looking up at the stars and wondering, just as you wonder now, before sleep takes you. As Sumerian civilization gave way to Akkadian, then Babylonian, then Assyrian, the stories of the Anunnaki evolved but never disappeared. Each culture reinterpreted the myths for their own purposes, emphasizing different gods, different aspects of the stories. The Babylonians elevated Marduk to supreme status. In the Enuma Elish, their creation epic, Marduk defeats Tiamat, the primordial chaos dragon, and from her body creates the world. This was clearly a political statement. Babylon was supreme, therefore its god must be supreme. The older gods, including the original Anunnaki, became Marduk's servants or were subsumed into Marduk himself through his 50 names. The Assyrians, fierce militarists who built an empire through conquest, made their national god Ashur supreme. Ashur took on many of Enlil's and Marduk's attributes, becoming the divine justification for Assyrian imperial expansion. To conquer in Ashur's name was holy duty, spreading order and civilization over chaos and barbarism. Yet underneath these political adaptations, the old stories persisted. The scribes continued to copy the ancient tablets, preserving the Sumerian originals alongside their Akkadian translations. The Epic of Gilgamesh was copied and recopied, evolving but maintaining its essential narrative. The stories of Inanna, of Enki, of the Flood, all survived in multiple versions. This preservation of ancient knowledge, this respect for the old traditions even while adapting them, characterizes Mesopotamian culture. They understood that wisdom accumulates over generations, that the past contains truths worth preserving. The scribble schools taught both contemporary practical knowledge and ancient classics. A well-educated Babylonian scribe in the 1st millennium BCE would learn languages dead for 1,000 years to read texts from civilization's dawn. We modern people have mostly lost this connection to deep time. A few centuries feels ancient to us. But in Mesopotamia they dealt routinely with traditions spanning thousands of years, with texts and temples and cities whose origins were lost in the mists of time even to them. The Anunnaki had become ancient history even to the ancients, yet their influence persisted, shaping law and kingship, religion and philosophy, art and literature. They were the foundation upon which all subsequent culture was built. Rest now in this deep time. Let the centuries blur together, let the millennia stack up like layers of sediment and sink down through them into sleep. We should consider the role of human agency in these ancient stories. Even if we accept that the Anunnaki existed in some form, humans were not mere puppets. The texts show humans making choices, acting with courage or cowardice, wisdom or foolishness. Gilgamesh chooses to seek immortality, to journey beyond the known world. Atrahasis chooses to build the boat, to save life from destruction. Kings choose to build temples or make war, to uphold justice or oppress their people. Farmers choose when to plant, Merchants choose what trades to make. Scribes choose what to record and preserve. The Anunnaki may have shaped humanity's potential, may have taught the arts of civilization, may have ruled as divine kings. But humans took those gifts and made them their own, adapted them, expanded them, created things the Anunnaki perhaps never imagined. Writing, invented to track temple accounts, became literature, poetry, law, history, science. Mathematics, taught for measuring fields and calculating harvests, became abstract theory, geometry, astronomy. Metallurgy, perhaps taught for specific purposes, became art, creating jewellery and sculpture of astonishing beauty. Humans are not merely recipients of knowledge but innovators, creators, beings who take what we're given and transform it into something new. Perhaps that was the Anunnaki's greatest gift. Not just knowledge or technology, but the capacity to learn, to adapt, to create. The Epic of Gilgamesh ends with the hero returned to Uruk, mortal and resigned to his mortality, but also proud. He shows Utnapishtim's ferryman the walls of Uruk, the great works he has built. "See what I have made," he says. "See what humans can accomplish. This is my immortality, not eternal life, but enduring works. Every human contributes to this ongoing project. Every generation builds on what came before, adds their own innovations and passes it forward. We are all part of this chain reaching back to the Sumerians, back to the Anunnaki, back to the dawn of civilization itself. Your own contributions, whatever they are, matter. You're part of this vast human story. But for now, for tonight, your task is simple. Rest. Sleep. Restore yourself for tomorrow's continuation of the journey." As the political landscape of Mesopotamia shifted over millennia, as empires rose and fell, the worship of the Anunnaki evolved but persisted. Even in the 1st century CE, temples to Babylonian gods still functioned, still had priests and rituals, still drew worshippers. The conquests of Alexander the Great in the 4th century BCE brought Greek culture and philosophy to Mesopotamia, but they didn't erase the older traditions. Instead, they merged, creating Hellenistic syncretism where Greek and Mesopotamian deities were identified with each other. Zeus was Marduk, Ishtar was Aphrodite. The stories blended, enriching both traditions. The rise of Christianity and later Islam would eventually displace the old gods, at least officially. But the influence remained in language, in art, in the calendar, in astronomy, in mathematics. The legacy of the Anunnaki, whether they were gods or aliens or mythological constructs, continues to shape our world today in ways both obvious and subtle. Our 7-day week comes from the 7 celestial bodies known to the ancients, each associated with an Anunnaki deity. Monday is Moon Day, Saturday is Saturn Day. In Romance languages, the pattern is more obvious. Mardi, Mars, Mercredi, Mercury, Jeudi, Jupiter, Vendredi, Venus, in French. Our 60-minute hour and 60-second minute come from the Sumerian base 60 number system, our 360-degree circle, our division of the zodiac into 12 signs of 30 degrees each. All Sumerian innovations, all preserved and transmitted down through the ages. Our concept of law as written code that applies equally to all, from the highest to the lowest, this comes from Hammurabi, who claimed he received his laws from the sun god Shamash. But Hammurabi was building on older Sumerian legal traditions, codes that the Sumerians themselves attributed to the Anunnaki. Our astronomical knowledge, our names for constellations, our understanding of planetary motion, all built on foundations laid by ancient Mesopotamian astronomers serving the Anunnaki's temples. The Anunnaki's influence extends far beyond ancient history. It lives in our calendars and our mathematics, our astronomy and our law, our literature and our philosophy. Whether they were real or mythological, their impact on human civilization is undeniable and enduring. Let this vast sweep of history wash over you. You are part of something so much larger than yourself, connected through time to the earliest civilizations, to the Sumerians who first built cities and wrote laws, who looked to the stars and wondered about the gods. In the quiet of the night, in this space between waking and sleeping, we can almost feel the presence of those ancient times. The ziggurat rising against the star-filled sky, the priests chanting in languages dead for millennia, the kings in their palaces making decisions that would echo through history. The Anunnaki, whatever they were, are gone now. No longer do beings descend from the sky to rule as gods. No longer do ziggurats house divine presences. The cities they founded lie in ruins, buried under sand and time, but something remains. The questions remain. Who are we? Where did we come from? Why are we here? Are we alone in the universe? Is there more to reality than what we can see and touch? These questions drove the Sumerians to create their myths, their explanations of gods from the stars who shaped humanity. These same questions drive us today in our scientific exploration, our space programs, our search for extraterrestrial intelligence, our philosophical and religious quests for meaning. Perhaps the Anunnaki were ancient astronauts. Perhaps they were simply myths, projections of human psychology, archetypal representations of forces we didn't yet understand scientifically. Perhaps they were something else entirely, something we still don't have the framework to comprehend. What matters is not necessarily the literal truth of the stories, but what they tell us about ourselves. We are beings who seek meaning, who create narratives to explain our existence, who look beyond ourselves for connection to something greater. The Sumerians did this, gazing up at the stars and seeing gods. We do this, gazing through telescopes and seeing planets and galaxies, searching for life, for intelligence, for confirmation that we're not alone. Whether we find advanced aliens or remain apparently alone in the cosmos, whether ancient astronauts visited Earth or the Anunnaki were always mythological, the human quest for understanding continues. We are perhaps still seeking the Anunnaki in whatever form they may take, seeking gods, seeking aliens, seeking answers to eternal questions. But for tonight, let the questions rest. Let the search pause. You have journeyed through thousands of years, through myths and legends, through ancient cities and forgotten kings. You have walked with the Anunnaki, the enigmatic beings who haunt humanity's oldest stories. Now it is time to rest. Time to let go of consciousness and drift into sleep. Time to let dreams take you where waking thought cannot go. Feel your body completely relaxed. Every muscle released, every joint loose, every breath slow and easy. Your mind is quiet, thoughts barely forming before they dissolve back into silence. The ancient world fades around you. The ziggurats crumble into sand. The cities return to the earth from which they were built. The Anunnaki ascend to whatever realm they now inhabit, if they inhabit any realm at all. You float in the dark, in the peaceful void between thoughts, between breaths, between heartbeats. This darkness is not frightening but comforting, like a warm blanket on a cold night, like a gentle hand on your forehead, soothing away all concerns. Sleep is approaching, that gentle dissolution of waking consciousness. Welcome it. Don't fight it. Let yourself sink into it like sinking into the softest bed, into the warmest embrace. The Anunnaki kings of ancient Earth have told their tales. The ziggurats have shared their secrets. The clay tablets have whispered their wisdom across the millennia. And now, having received these gifts from the deep past, you can release them. Let them settle into your unconscious mind where they will do their work while you sleep. Dreams await you, and in dreams, who knows what ancient wisdom might surface, what connections your sleeping mind might make, what insights dawn brings after a night of deep, restorative rest. But these are concerns for tomorrow. Tonight, now, this moment, there is only the gentle descent into sleep, the letting go, the surrender to rest. Your breathing is barely perceptible. Your body is heavy, sinking into the bed, as if you were sinking into the earth itself, becoming one with the ancient soil that has cradled humanity since the beginning. The Anunnaki watch from their distant realm, perhaps, with benevolence or indifference or something beyond human understanding. But it doesn't matter now. Nothing matters now except this peace, this rest, this deep and healing sleep. Let go. Release everything. Surrender to the darkness and the silence and the peace. The story is over. The night enfolds you. Sleep claims you. And you drift away, away, away into dreams, into darkness, into the soft and gentle oblivion of deepest sleep. Good night, traveller through ancient times. Sleep well, seeker of mysteries. Rest now, and let the Anunnaki kings watch over your slumber as they once watched over the first cities of humanity in the ancient land between two rivers.